Attention listeners, ahead are spoilers.
Hello and welcome to the Movie Trap. My name is Russell Carlson and I am joined by Chris Boroff.
Why are we in the woods? I can't remember if that's actually a line in the movie. I can't really remember any lines in the movie, to be honest.
That's right. I'm also joined by Zach Powers.
It's about trauma. You know, it's a modern horror movie. It's about trauma.
Sure. There you go. Well, welcome everybody back to the Movie Trap. On the Movie Trap, each one of the three hosts you just met picks a theme, and then each of us picks a movie based on that theme. After we've watched all three movies, we will then vote with an allocated amount of points, plus some bonus points we're going to earn along the way. Then, whichever movie wins the vote, that host gets to pick the next theme. And that is what we are in right now, because we are in a brand new theme. It is Chris Boroff's theme, who stole it away, probably unjustly so, because he has chosen the theme. We've had a horror movie theme, and then for Halloween, and then he did a horror movie for the theme before that, and so Boroff decided enough of that. We're gonna go back to horror movies. So here we are. The theme is horror movies that have been recommended to you that you have not seen, and we are here today with Boroff's first pick of 2022 Paramount Plus's Significant Other. And that's where we are today.
I feel the need to point out that it's not important to win, it's how you play the game. And if you have fun doing it.
That's right, exactly. So before we get into the very this is going to be a brief walk in the park, fair listeners. So good. I mean, you picked a good one.
That sentiment sounds like somebody who won the last round because Russell was like, "Your movie was probably better, Zach, but you've won the last two rounds."
That's right. Yeah. No, that was my thumb on the scale, and so I got what I deserved. So maybe some vengeance for the peck and paw thing. I don't know. So here we go. So each of us has 10 points, and then each of us have 3 bonus points that we can give out to each other for whatever reason along the way. So with that being said, Zach Powers, go ahead and push us along on the camping trip. We're gonna unpack and start trying to put together a tent. And let us go with Significant Other.
Yeah, Significant Other is a 2022 sci-fi horror movie. It was written and directed by Dan Burke and Robert Olson. It stars Micah Monroe and Jake Lacey, and has minor bit parts for a couple other people. Small cast, so we can jump pretty quickly into it. It's on Paramount Plus if you are interested. Basically it opens with something red falling from the sky, and we see a deer getting killed by a tentacle. Meanwhile, a long-term but unmarried couple named Ruth and Harry, played by Micah Monroe and Jake Lacey, are going on a backpacking trip through the woods. Ruth is unsettled. She feels uncomfortable in the woods. She's more comfortable with surfing and things like that, but he reassures her. They spend a little time hiking. They discover a sort of horrible deer carcass, and one night Ruth sees a deer that looks very similar to that deer carcass, which is distinct because it only has one antler, sort of staring at them in the night, and is concerned it was the same deer they saw. But Jake assuages her, and they push through to a scenic lookout where I'm going to use Jake and Harry interchangeably because I recognize this actor. He was from The White Lotus and The Office. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They hike to Jake. And he proposes to her, and she has a panic attack and says no. They discuss it later, and she's like, you know how I feel about marriage, and it's something that clearly is based on the divorce of her parents. We also established that she has medication for her panic attacks. Eventually, they begin to travel back to their car. This is a multi-day backpacking trip. And Ruth finds a weird, sludgy blue puddle in a cave. After she emerges, she seems very different. And after acting bizarrely around him for a day or two, she says she has reconsidered his proposition and wants him to propose again. But not here in the middle of the woods, back where he originally intended to do it. So they travel back to the scenic lookout, a cliff over some ocean. And he proposes again. She accepts before immediately forcing him over the cliff and onto a rock, seemingly killing him. She wanders into the woods and eventually is found by another couple who attempts to, do their due diligence and bring her back to health. She's like semi-catatonic. She won't discuss what's happened to her. But that evening, Harry, who is in fact alive, appears and kills the kindly couple who has found her, sort of using very Terminator 2 style techniques. He's got a big long fingernail that he uses to cut through people's faces.
Definitely T-1000 vibes, for sure.
Yeah. And he begins to inquire to Ruth after coercing her to come out by holding one of the people at hostage before killing them, that he is not Harry anymore. He is something else. He was the thing that inhabited the deer that looked on him, the deer that he killed. It's some kind of shape-shifting alien. And Ruth reveals that she found a cave, the cave with the blue puddle, where she also saw Harry's corpse cocooned up on the wall, and realized he had been replaced. But there's a bit of a trick. He attempts to kill Ruth, but realizes he can't, because in taking Harry's form, his body, all that, he has absorbed Harry's love for her, and decides that instead of killing her, he is going to try and take her with him on his ship, and out of an imminent alien attack. He is a scout for a hostile species of some kind. And so she follows him back to his ship, sort of as a hostage, but sort of pretending she accepts his terms, where she sees the ship, and also it is right next to the ocean again. So she stabs him with a knife she stole away from the couple, and then swims out into the ocean. He follows after her, bleeding profusely, but supernaturally impervious to harm, and is attacked by sharks. So she returns back to the shore and attempts to run. She comes back across the dead couple's campsite, where Harry manages to catch up to her, and beguiled by love, apparently something no other species he's ever inhabited is able to have. It's just simply a human only emotion.
That's our one weakness.
He takes her to a cave and says the idea, love is like a need, a desire, like sleeping or eating, but it can never be satisfied because you can never fully become the other person, but I can do that. And he begins to adapt her form, at which point she sees an opportunity. She had used the last of her medication for her panic attacks, so she was out, and begins to bring up her deepest insecurities and anxieties and traumas about her parents, who divorced and then became recluses and or alcoholics, and how she believes that the only place life or love can lead is to a similar terrible end. She induces the alien in her form, adopting her anxieties, to have a panic attack about the things that cause her the most anxieties, at which point she manages to overpower it and smash it in the head pretty good with a rock. She runs away, manages to get back to her car, and begins to drive away when the alien imposter creature, in her voice, speaks through the car radio, saying she was sort of foolish to think she could get away so easily, as more red objects begin to fall from the sky, implying there are many more of these creatures on their way. And that's the movie.
Yeah. The real
the
significant
dogs are
others
barking
were the
right
friends
now.
we made along the way.
Yeah, the dogs in the background are barking. That's how
yeah.
woofed this movie was.
Yeah, it was kind of a wolf, wasn't it? Because like I even with like the time, like the perception shift with her, and then she kills the boyfriend, and then it's kind of revealed on that. It's a neat little trick that they don't ever do again. And then it just became, the second half of the movie is just like bad guy speeches, where he's just like explaining the master plan and everything. And I don't know.
It feels a little bit like it should have been maybe an episode of like Outer Limits or Twilight Zone. Like even at 80 minutes,
you're gonna get my point, buddy.
They could have.
I think they could have cut it down. Yeah, this could have been a 45-minute episode of television, maybe an hour tops.
And I think
it's a short
more
movie,
fun.
and it's a short movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could do a Black Mirror type thing with this, and I think. I think the first half hour in particular takes a little too much time. Not a lot happens. They discover the deer, and there's like, oh, there's something in the night that's making me uncomfortable. But it takes a while for things to really pick up and move a little bit more.
Yeah,
and they don't even. They're surrounded. They actually, like, you could tell this is more or less shot in like the Pacific Northwest or adjacent or whatever, and it's such a creepy atmosphere to film in anyway. Like David Lynch always talked about that when he was doing Twin Peaks, and I always felt like they kind of had a missed opportunity where it just like didn't really build on that a lot, other than she's just panicked about life in general and stuff. That just missed opportunity.
Yeah, it kind of feels like they focused solely on like two fears with this, which were either like being in a wonky relationship where you can't trust the other person, or unmanaged anxiety, which I know personally, like emotionally, I get how that's troubling. But if there's a monster in the woods killing people, there are more pressing and interesting things to deal with emotionally and physically in that circumstance. It seems like there are brief moments the movie wakes up and it's just a somnambulant jog for the rest of it.
Yeah. I also, side note, push my other thing back till 8, so we do have we have a little time.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, great. So like yeah, Borif, I think you're completely right, and that's why I'm gonna give you a point for the Twilight Zone thing, because I'm like, this is really just like a Doctor Who episode, and instead of having the bad guy speech, you could have the Doctor explain everything, and the really it's the complex human emotion that aliens will never understand, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the old talk don't show thing. You're supposed to have people have long speeches. In action movies, you don't need to show what they're doing. You have to have them talk it through.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I felt like, there's sort of vague hints at some of like the details and stuff of this couple's relationship, but it was told in a drawn out way, particularly in the first act of the movie, that I think a stronger writer could have condensed down pretty easily. Like there's a few scenes where it's like even the first scene where they're in the car and she's sleeping and he kind of goofs on her with like his favorite song that his mom used to like or whatever. Like that's a good moment to establish a relationship. I think some of the other ones were not necessarily bad, they just weren't stand out. And I think if you did a couple more passes, maybe you could condense those early scenes a little bit and still get the idea of these characters, and maybe even a better idea of where the Micah Moreau character is at. Like you get the idea she's tense because she's nervous about the woods, but at the same time, she's comfortable with the water. Like, I think you could more succinctly and clearly express like some of the ideas behind these characters. Maybe the, contrast more strongly, him reminiscing about his mom with the fact that her parents were apparently not a good situation,
Yeah. I'm going to give you
and
a point.
obviously you don't want to do it so obviously that it's like, okay, we get it, nail on the head. But I think there is a balance.
I'm gonna totally give you a point, because it was the same thing that jumped out at me. Like, for as much time as this movie took setting up this relationship, I couldn't help but remember the movie Annihilation. Have you guys seen that?
Sure, yeah, I have.
So, in that movie, they set up a very similar relationship question between the main character and her husband, or the boyfriend that disappears in the thing. They did that whole thing in like a scene or two. Like, the guy comes home and you could tell it's an uncomfortable,
he was an imposter when you
relationship.
first see him on the screen.
Yeah. And that movie
Or
even asks
something.
better
I don't know if
versions
it's
of
imposter exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, that movie asks better questions than this one did. Like, as soon as it gets to the point of like, what is this emotion I'm feeling? Like, in the movie Annihilation, like, spoiler warning, the movie ends with Natalie Portman and Oscar Isaac smooching or getting close to each other, and the assumption is you don't know if they're actually them or if they're a simulacrum of them that has come back,
or which one is real and which one is false. It's like very unclear.
But it leaves you with that notion of like, what is love then? What is your relationship? If it's an exact copy of who you were, then who are you? Like, do you still feel the way? Does it matter?
I think that the opening scene of this movie might have been actually a mistake. Maybe just show the thing falling to earth, but I think the scene with the deer where you see, I just think they revealed too many cards in terms of the imposter creature a little early, when it might have been more interesting at the beginning of the movie to not have an idea of what was in the woods or what was going on.
Right. I think you could make that work, but I mean, as soon as he shows back up after he pushes it back, it's just it's just constant, like, here's my evil plan, so like once they remove that veil of ambiguity from the monster, you're right, it makes the deer stuff like kind of a waste of time. And like, if we had kept the monster and its intentions and its sort of plan more at arm's length, I think it probably would have been served a little bit better. But I think what the movie's trying to do, I think, kind of two things at once, trying to do like a talk about like human emotions and humans interacting with love and blah blah blah, but it also, when you're trying to build suspense and thrilling stuff like that, it doesn't serve your movie well when all the stuff just stops and then you just listen to a guy just talk on and on about it. I think the way they do like their reveal and don't reveal information, maybe the strongest segment of the movie in that regard is the segment where she has found Harry's real body, but we don't know that. All we know is she found a blue puddle. Right.
And from the audience perspective, it seems like she has changed suddenly and dramatically and takes him back to the cliff and shoves him off. And it clearly, like, the idea is she is the danger. Like, whatever the creature thing that's out in the woods, like, it's infested her, even through when she meets the couple, up until the Harry character reemerges and we realize, oh, she was changed because she realized something else was wrong. And I think that misdirect works pretty well. Like, I think that's maybe the most effective moment of the misdirect of the film, and in terms of, that sort of thing.
I feel like that ambiguity could have like taken up more of the film. Like, completely I just keep thinking of other movies that are better than this, like Under the Skin. I don't know if you guys have seen Under the Skin. I have not. It's a great movie. I would suggest it. It is the one with Scarlett Johansson. She plays an alien. The thing is that you have most of that movie set up where you don't know what the morals are, and it's extremely intense on the ambiguity of what that character is there for. They eventually reveal it in the movie. It's a great movie. I'm not going to spoil it. There's some really crazy stuff that happens later. But it really does play out that ambiguity, and you feel it as an audience member because you're not sure if you like this person by the end of the movie. You kind of are forced to empathize because it is the main character, but it's definitely something that you as a viewer, you have reservations about. In this one, though, you don't really have much from that. It's like you have a brief, like, feint where it's like, oh, she might be the bad guy, and then it's like back to, oh, nope, that guy's the bad guy.
Yeah.
The tone was super weird. How do you guys feel about, like, I like Jack Lacey. Jake Lacey? Jake Lacey.
Jake.
I like Jake. I keep getting that thing with a name. I really liked him in, you mentioned it, the
White
trip,
Lotus?
White Lotus. Really cool in the White Lotus. I like Micah Monroe from It Follows and a couple other movies.
The Guest she's in.
The Guest. This seems to me like a missed opportunity because Jake Lacey is so upbeat and his personality doesn't change exactly when he becomes possessed, I guess, or replaced.
Yes.
So a lot of the
Yeah,
upbeat stuff
Yeah.
feels weird.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. How did that feel to you guys?
Yeah.
Did that feel okay?
It only served like for that first couple minutes until like you, the audience, get the reveal of her seeing the corpse as a pod person or whatever, and then, but I think you're exactly right. It's not like there's a big shift in dynamic between the replicant and Jake Lacey himself. I mean, I get that they say that that's sort of the point, that you encompass the whole package. You don't get to pick and choose, but at the same time, if you were just watching this movie with your eyes closed and you hear the conversations that Make 'Em Alone and Jake Lacey are having as a normal couple, and then flash forward and then you took a nap and you woke up and you're just seeing these people having a conversation, you'd think, oh, well, I guess this is not a horror movie. So I kind of agree with you. Not that Jake Lacey, I've seen him do like kind of creepy, monstrous stuff in a different kind of vibe, but if you ever see that Friend of the Family show on Peacock where he plays a nasty character, pedophile asshole from the 70s, when it's a good show and he's really good in it, but plays a very unpleasant person.
I think that's actually largely what he gets cast as, especially these days.
Hey, if they're picking up the phone.
Yeah. Like the White Lotus character he plays is an utter piece of shit. He's the worst.
Yeah, it's funny because I guess he's like happily married to his long-term girlfriend and they have 2 kids, but he keeps getting cast as these 30-something shitbags. So it's kind of a strange fit.
Make hay while the sun shines, buddy.
To our age.
Yeah. And he's
Go get it.
in the first section of this movie, like, he seems like a genuinely pretty nice guy. So there's that.
Yeah, and the conflict in the relationship seemed genuine and earnest. That seemed like actually human. Where like nobody's really a bad guy here. There's just different outlooks and different anxieties and that kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of nice. And then again, to just kind of like, oh, love was the secret answer all along. It did. And again, you're right. It's a very short movie. I mean, I guess that's the one thing I'll say about that. It's brief. It uses the topography of the forest really well. The editing and cinematography didn't look cheap. It looked polished. And it did okay, but there should have been more. I know it's kind of fashionable these days with horror movies, but a lot more like pregnant pauses, like of building the kind of, when you're surrounded with that kind of nature, I think elevating the kind of otherworldliness of the nature, I think, would have served this movie a little well, and I don't think it really got there or even attempted to. And
I think
I think it would have been more fun if there'd been like other dangers in the forest and they'd amp that up. Like the shark thing didn't really work for me because it seemed really silly. They had to swim out to get attacked by sharks. If they just had
it seemed a bit of a lucky.
That would have been more interesting.
It seemed a little lucky to me that there was a shark there at the exact right time, to be honest with you. But I think like the part that like the of his later movie sort of villain turn. Like I think that there is like this kernel of an interesting idea in like the, you know, love is a kind of desire. It's the one desire that you can't like ever really fully quench, like, and you know, fully inhabiting the other person. I think there's like interesting routes you could go down with that about, you know, not just control in the love in the abstract, but control and you know, like abuse and but also like you know, is it possible, like, there are parts of any person that you probably don't love, like there are things about them, and I feel like it didn't really take the time to explore those really in any like strong way.
Yeah, the TV show Made for Love actually did a better dig into that because it was like two people's brains merging against one of their wills. So it got a lot more into just how toxic a controlling relationship can be.
And a pretty recent horror movie that I think probably eats this movie's lunch as far as like toxic romance relationships would be Midsummer. You know, where it does kind of have that vibe and deeply entwined with trauma. Now, I mean, with Midsummer, it hammers the trauma home a lot. This one more or less just kind of hints at it and, you know, uses medication. It's a different vibe in Midsummer, but the theme is kind of the same. If I don't know if I'm way out of left field, but I kind of
no. It seems
when
pretty
she
in line.
puts
Sure,
the guy
yeah.
up. Yeah,
I think there's like 6 other different things going on in Midsummer to me, but that's definitely one of the themes of that movie.
Yeah, and I mean, Midsummer I think is a much better movie than this one, and accomplishes the goal of that theme better than this movie does. Yeah, Midsummer's got a lot of else going on with it, but you know, I think when the core emotional direction of a main character is basically kind of refocusing trauma or refocusing anxiety to a different narrative. I that's where I kind of got that vibe with when she's explaining to the alien that like, now you've got, you know, now you need your Xanax, you know, that kind of thing. I thought of like, well, okay, I mean, like, I thought Midsummer kind of did that a little better about like working through trauma while like learning to live with it, you know.
I'd agree. This movie, to me, it really falls into that thing where I don't think they knew how to get through the story. So there's a lot of stuff that feels like they're doing paint by number, like Sid Field, like I have to solve this problem. I need to set up a problem and a solution within this context. So like, I don't know, like the relationship issues and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, but she's going to switch positions with the monster, and then the monster's going to have anxiety, but the monster's going to freak out because it doesn't have pills. Like a lot of that stuff is just, it's very key and lock. It's not a good storytelling tactic because it's like you set up a key and then you put it in the lock. It's like, you know, emotions don't work like Chekhov's gun to me. Like, it should be something where you can set up an emotion and stuff like that, but it's not like it then comes to a hard plot point. It should be something that informs what's happening, not just really fucking irritating me. That's what it was.
Bake that into a t-shirt for you, Bora. If emotion should not be Chekhov's gun. I really like that. I don't know why that tickles me so much, but that's just really funny to me.
Here, let me ask you guys.
Yeah, I'll throw a point for that one. That's a very interesting
very
line.
Good one.
Thank you.
I don't know why that just got to me. It's funny.
I don't know. But let me ask you guys this, because I keep finding myself thinking of better movies or movies that sort of followed through on the promise. Like you mentioned Midsummer, I mentioned Annihilation. Like, do you guys have any other ones that like jumped out at you while you're watching this, where you're like, I really wish I was watching that instead?
Oh, many times. You know, like what was it recently? Oh, I watched that Super Mario Brothers movie, right? and I kind of knew what it was.
Movie about
It's-
trauma and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I knew it was just gonna be like, let me throw all the Mario shit I could throw at you in a condensed amount of time, and hopefully you'll respond enough to ignore the paper thin characterization, plot, what have you. And I immediately when I'm watching, you know what did a better job of like doing this kind of movie with Detective Pikachu. Like that was a lot better, much more successful, because they took the Roger Rabbit approach of video games rather than like, let me just throw a animated Mario with Joan Jett and the Blackhearts playing or whatever.
So significant other got you thinking about Super Mario Brothers?
Well, no, significant other. When I was watching this movie, I immediately, as soon as the alien showed up, I kept waiting for like, Kirk and Spock to beam down. Aha, we found him. Here's our rogue alien. Once you start getting into the bad guy, evil scientist speeches, which is pretty much most of the rest of the movie, I kept waiting for like the doctor to show up, or like, I don't know, it was all a dream or something. Then like anything to make it more interesting. At least it didn't do that. Once it started on that trajectory, it kept with it. It was on that track and didn't veer from it. So credit to that. It didn't panic there at the end. You're right, where they pretty much said, "Oh, well, look at that, it's 5:00. Punch out. Let's go to the bar."
They're probably looking around the woods and they're like, "Man, can we afford to go anywhere else? We can't. Okay, just go out in the water."
Right.
Anyway, Zach, do you have anything?
I don't know. I guess Russell mentioning a very recent movie makes me think. And this will be a rare sort of shout out to this franchise for me. Like, I think maybe some of the strongest entries in the entire MCU canon are the Guardians movies, because I think those movies are also very much about like dealing with horrific traumatic pasts and coming to terms with that stuff, trying to define a relationship. And this one has the added I saw the new one, I think it'll be the last MCU movie I see in theaters. It has the added element of the main character, the main like romance in the first two. One of the characters has functionally been replaced by an entirely new character who doesn't give a shit about the Chris Pratt character.
We're back to zero.
I
feel like that might be me in real life.
And it's, but it's also, in terms of like, it's a lot about one of the characters' very horrible backstories, and the entire series is kind of this character growing from a complete asshole who can't deal with his pain to growing into something a little better. I think it talks about similar themes in a more interesting and fun way. It's, I'll rarely give a shout out to that series. I think that those are three of the movies that have character and individuality, in part because they have almost always been allowed to be divorced from the larger world around them in the way that none of the other MCU movies are. This one being the biggest exception because, they killed one of his characters in the Avengers, which James Gunn apparently didn't want to happen, but Marvel said, "Fuck you, it's happening." But yeah, so I don't know, and I did enjoy that movie, and it has a lot of similar themes, but I had a more enjoyable, interesting time watching it. I think
I'm
overall,
surprised.
I think
I'm candidly surprised that you suggested an MCU film, just because I kind of
me
got the
too,
feeling
buddy. I almost feel like I should give you a
movies.
point. Yeah,
Yeah.
I almost feel like I should give you a
This is the
point.
first one I've liked since Endgame, probably, and I've skipped a couple along the way. Like No Way Home comes, or whatever, the fucking Spider-Man one comes the closest, but that movie, like, there's nothing new or novel about it. It's just it's a ride on nostalgia, and without that nostalgia, I think that movie would fall apart pretty fucking hard. This one, and before Endgame, the other Guardians movies are some of the ones that I think are like, okay, this is like something. There's actual artistry being put into this. I don't think it'll happen again anytime soon, especially now that like James Gunn, the one guy they let do that, is gone. But they let him do it for his 3 movies, and now that part of the era is done. They can hire Sam Raimi or whatever, the Nomadland woman, and the studio will make the film for them.
Yeah, and
I had a feeling
at
that
this point, ChatGPT is gonna do it.
Yeah, I had a feeling with all the Guardian movies that it originally was allowed to be weird just because they thought it was going to bomb. They were like, we got to put out this Guardians movie, let's do it.
Yep.
And then he did it, and they're like, oh, but people really like this. And then they hard flipped after that, and they all became like self-aware. That's one of the things I noticed is like all the MCU movies seem to immediately become self-aware.
The other ones did it cheap. They became funnier in sort of an imitative way after that movie came out.
Yeah,
to the point where now that's every single movie in the MCU.
It's true because like before that, like before the first Guardians, like you were kind of wasting away with like Thor 2 and Iron Man 3 and stuff. And then Winter Soldier.
Some
and
of them,
Guardians
Winter
comes out.
Soldier's good.
Yeah,
like,
they came
but
out
it's
the
not
same
funny.
year.
Winter Soldier's
no,
not funny.
No, it's not. But and then after that, they kind of kept going with the cookie cutter formula, Doctor Strange, what have you, and then like that's the only reason why I'm excited not to keep going about James Gunn, but like I don't really care about DC all that much, but I will say the fact that Zack Snyder fans are absolutely livid that James Gunn is taking over the DC cinematic universe makes me all the go James Gunn. I'm on James Gunn for the record. If I had to choose between Zack Snyder and James Gunn, it's not even really a choice. But back to you, Borf. I mean, back to the movie. Like, I don't even think this is even a great use of aliens being the bad guy. I mean, I can think of 20 different movies that do this a lot better.
It's pod people. It's a little The Thing.
Yeah. I mean,
here's the thing. Like the whole idea behind the theme was pick out a movie that you've not seen that people kept suggesting, and this one had been suggested both in real life. Red Letter Media suggested it at one point. I think there was another random YouTuber that had suggested it, and they all made it seem like, okay, it's not a great movie, but it's like 80 minutes, and it'll be fun, and it'll be exciting. And I will say that it was 80 minutes.
I don't think it was terrible. I think like they did what they wanted to do pretty competently. I just don't think it was anything particularly groundbreaking or like novel or like shocking. Like, you know,
it's
a pretty typical.
If I may, it's a 40-degree day. You know.
Yes, there you go. That's
a 40-degree day.
Yeah. Yep.
Because nobody gives a fuck about a 40-degree day. I mean, it's not offensive. I mean, it's not deep hurting or anything. But yeah, no, I'm pretty much at the end of that, I'm like, well, that was a movie. That happened, I guess, you know. And,
it felt like something I would have watched on Sci-Fi Channel. Yeah.
So what you were, this was, I guess, because I mean, like, the reviews I seen were, like, mostly tepid. So I'm shocked that this was more or less that people, you'd have to be sought out for this movie because I never even heard of this movie until you mentioned it for the podcast. Yeah. So I'm actually kind of what's there that is that it's short. I mean, is it have that kind of like, well, this was done with kind of a low budget and it's short? Is that like, do you think they grade on a curve because of that?
Possibly. I think when it was suggested by Red Letter Media, they were originally doing it just because people were there to watch the Picard series. So they're like, if you happen to have it or it was on Paramount, I think. Mm-hmm. They're like, if you have it, this is also a thing on there you can watch, almost as like a toss-in. But, you know, it's one of these things, like, I like the actors, and I was kind of hopeful that, specifically with Micah Monroe, like, there hasn't been a really, like, good starring role that she's been in since, like, It Follows and The Guest. Yeah, so she's done a lot of movies. Recently. Yeah, so it's, you know, I like her in stuff, so I'm still hopeful that someone will put her in a movie that has some teeth in it.
And to her credit, you know, taking a role like this, it's a meaty role. I mean, it's pretty much you and one other guy. So I mean, you're doing a lot of
Mm-hmm.
work. So and you know, and at least you're outdoors. I mean, I guess if you're an outdoor, I mean, I think this shoot would be cold and miserable. But if you're that kind of guy, this would be a fun shoot for you because you're outside most of the time. And I'll say that even the CGI, I didn't think was all that distracting. Looked pretty good, you know, for it being Paramount Plus. It wasn't. There was so little of it that you could tell that they really just hyper focused on the parts that they absolutely had to do it for. So well done on budget management, I guess. But you could tell this was done on a budget. This was done pretty on the cheap, pretty on the quick. And it looks like it, and that's fine. There is room for that in my life, absolutely. Like I am good with these kinds of movies, but I mean, you could do a little better,
Yeah.
A little.
I think we're all probably on the same page with this one. Like, it's fine. I would say this is a solid beige. 40-degree day, I think, is the best way to put it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll have B-ish, sort of time with it.
I don't feel like passion
you'll have a
to
B-
be angry.
time.
It's just there.
Right. Yeah, you'll by the end of it you'll feel like B-, and then as you think about it, well, they're really more of a C+, really. Like it but because it doesn't stick with you as you walk away. I guess I'll wrap up with my final thoughts, just because like it very much just is a Doctor Who episode, like it's
Sure.
It's a sci-fi fun turn that I think all three of us have said that, boy, short of this movie done, you could have shaved about 20 minutes off of it and slapped on a Outer Limits or Twilight Zone thing at the beginning and end of it and probably called it a day. And which is weird, because I think Paramount Plus does do the Twilight Zone, or at least they used to. So I don't know why they just didn't do it that way. Or maybe that's how this script came to be. Maybe it was just like they canceled Twilight Zone and they just had this script laying around and said, make it releasable to a theater or two and we'll call it good. You never know.
That could be correct. I didn't look up the history of production. Yeah, I didn't look up any of the history of production on it.
I couldn't find anything.
Yeah, it seems slight.
Yeah, it's pretty thin.
I mean, the advertising wasn't big. I didn't hear it before Chris mentioned it. I'd never heard anybody talk about it. So
yeah,
yeah,
and that's all I've got. It was fine.
Yeah. Do you want me to? I'll just jump into it and just say final thoughts. My final thoughts were, it's a perfectly fine movie. I'd say it was a journeyman production. It's not something that really shook me hard. I kind of wish that it had done a little bit more. And I look forward to what everyone involved does in the future, because it seems like there's promise here. It's just this wasn't particularly exciting.
yeah, I'm gonna echo. I had a similar thought to Chris, where I was like trying to look up about the people behind this, Dan Burke and Robert Olson, who I could find very little about. It seems like this is the first sort of even semi-big thing they're attached to, and I could definitely see this being like the first movie in like a career that's a little more interesting. Like you almost, most great directors have that very first movie that's like, all right, like it's okay, like there's some interesting things about it. I think like most of them have like a bit more of a flair than this movie probably, but this wasn't a bad film, especially if this was their very first effort. Definitely like the little Morphe nail thing that the guy does, like the T-1000 vibes were so heavy on that one. It was truly him killing the parents in the kitchen with the milk.
Yeah. The hand flick too kind of bugged me every time he did the hand flick to do it, where it's just like enough of you, that was too much. Like I could handle the slicey, but the hand flick was just like, come on, that's too much.
And the one person, he literally did it through their head, like by elongating his fingernail, very much exactly like the T-1000. There's some interesting ideas that I think they probably could have spent a couple more drafts either condensing or expanding various parts of this. It was not you're not going to like be like offended that you watched it or anything. You'll probably be like, oh, there's some fun parts, interesting times, that kind of movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think
good performances. I think both Jake Lacey and Mike Emerow delivered strong performances.
Indeed. Yeah, I think with what was on the page, they did really well. So I think we are all in agreement. Missed opportunity with this one. They kind of you had it on the red zone and you just decided to punt. So that's fine, whatever. So, okay, that concludes this movie, I think. So let me get a rundown of the points. Chris Boroff, you got 2 points today. One from me for comparing it to The Twilight Zone, and then the one from Zach about Chekhov's gun cannot be a human emotion. And Zach Powers, you got a point from Chris for the complexity of love and human emotion and how that they kind of reduce that. So that brings you, Chris, to 2 bonus points, me to 2 bonus points, and Zach with you 2 bonus points. So that is where we are at. And the spinning bottle turns to me. What will my 7 minutes of heaven be? I thought about this some time because I don't get a lot of, I'm not quite into horror movie circles, and most people know better than to recommend them to me because I always say I'll get around to it. But I did have one in mind that I guess that gives me a good excuse to finally do it. Because I saw this, it's a sequel. Because I saw the first one, it was fine, but due to the hype around it, I felt pretty underwhelmed about it. But I am gonna go with 2022, same year. Ty West, T West's Pearl, the sequel to X. Because I have not seen it. I've seen X, but I have not seen Pearl. And as I understand, it's going to be a trilogy. So, might as well keep her up. So that's what we're going to be doing. We'll be doing 2022. Is it Ty West? T West? I don't know.
T West. I think it's T West.
Anyway,
might be Ty West.
I thought it was Ty, but I thought it was Ty.
I have no idea.
Well.
So, yeah. Tune in next time for that.
I have seen this.
Okay.
And Shannon really loves this movie.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
hey, great.
I also happen to have seen it. I also think we're going to have a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to your reaction, Carlson.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. I'm the only one in the dark. This is always a great, this is always promise for comedy, folks. I promise. Okay. So with that in mind, thank you so much for joining us. And we're trickling the episodes out. It's getting harder and harder because we're all a little bit busier, but stay patient with us. We're around. As always, subscribe, like, share, tell your friends. We're nice folks. And that being said, I have been Russell Carlson, and I have been joined by Chris Boroff.
I don't remember what love is. I'm an alien. I still don't remember any lines from the movie.
For as talky as it was, too. Not a lot of memorable dialogue. Anyway, and I've also been joined by Zach Powers.
My first kiss was Belinda on a trampoline. I remember that.
Good on you.
Alrighty. Well, before we get replicated by an alien scout to destroy the planet, as we always say here on the Movie Trap, Diane Ladd is too young to play Chevy Chase's mom. It's very true.
This Movie Trap, promise.
It is. See ya, folks.
Were you alone?
I said I don't remember. I think something's really wrong with her.
What I'm trying to say is, you're my person.